About 30 years ago, I did my first international sandshore competition. And that was in or near London in the UK. I'm not quite sure anymore where exactly it was, but that was the area. And it was European Championships. And I competed in sandshore for the first time there at that level and was obviously woefully underprepared in the sense that I had no idea what I was doing and did not have the sufficient training to do really well, which I didn't. That was not really what I want to talk about. I want to mention something else, and that is what happened before my first fight. The competition area was pretty big. It was a huge hall, and that was where everybody would fight or compete in the forms. And then we had a very big, almost equally big area right next to it where you could warm up. It was quite nice. Now, at one point, and this was before I had my first fight, I saw this guy who was warming up and he was shadow boxing. It didn't take long before pretty much everybody stopped to watch him. I think he was from the Spanish team or the Italian team, I don't remember. But what was so impressive about him is that he was punching and kicking and doing combinations, doing these high kicks and everything. And it was just so blazingly fast and technically correct that everybody was like, who is this guy? I mean, he's going to just beat everybody up. And that went on for a while. And then, he stopped and he stretched some more and this and that. He was in my weight class. So I was like, oh crap, I'm going to have to fight that one. So you can be sure that I was trying to watch when that guy was fighting, and everybody else was as well. To not bury the lead, he was crap. Once he actually had to fight, all that technique went away, all the speed went away. Not all of it, but most of it. The fluidity, the combinations, the technical accuracy, the precision of techniques. It was mostly gone. And I was still very young back then and just getting started competing. That was a really important lesson for me because it drove home the point of not judging a book by its cover, not in the typical negative way that people see it, that you shouldn't underestimate people, but you also shouldn't overestimate people when you take them out of the context that will be the actual event in which they have to perform. I basically learned from that this lesson of no matter what the other guy does or shows before the fight is actually on, uh, the fight needs to happen, and then we'll see. Now, this is something that most people who train for a while will experience at one point, and that is you are in the gym or in class or wherever it is that you train, and there's just this one guy who is just better than everybody else, but he never competes. And as long as he's in the training environment, he's just owning everybody and he's just so much better. And that guy then goes out to compete and he just can't make it work. In most of the cases, in my opinion, it's a matter of psychological aspects, the mental part, not mentally being prepared enough or having difficulty dealing with adrenal stress or the pressures of competing and everybody watching and so on, like a host of issues, but none of them are physical conditioning related. They're not technical. It's not strategy and tactics. It's just the mindset is not what it needs to be. And as a result, whatever he can do in the gym just stays there for the most part and doesn't come out when it needs to come out, which requires specific training for some people, whereas others have just no issue with it. And that is the opposite side of that coin, is the guys who are not that great in the gym. They're okay, they're good, but you ask him to do more complex things like a longer combination or work on some specific concepts that are a little bit more complex, for instance, tactics and strategy and so on. They have a hard time making that work. But then you put them in the actual competition, they fight and they just do their thing. It's not going to be what you asked them in gym, but it's still very effective. And I've had students like that I coached, that we had to stick to basic stuff in preparation for their fights, because that was all what would come out. And this had to do with experience, obviously, and a bunch of other factors, but it was also something innate that they were only capable to learn and acquire certain skills up to a certain point. And then they would compete, and the basic stuff came out, but they were really good at it, and they committed to it, and they were not afraid to go to war with the other guy, and so on. Which is the opposite end of that scale of the guy I first mentioned, where it's all about, excellent technique, conditioning, and everything you want, except once it really counts, that's not what they show. When I say that kind of stuff, people often think, well, you're blaming this guy or that guy. That's not really what I'm talking about. It's just something that you can, if you train long enough, you can encounter and recognize, like, okay, this is just what happens with certain people. Has nothing to do with courage or anything like that. It's just that these people need specific training. These guys need specific training, mental coaching, and so on, to get them over that bump in the road that is getting in the way of reaching their full potential. Some people never do. Some people always stay, limited in that regard. A good example of that is an MMA fighter called Uriah Hall, which if you watch his whole career, he's the guy who did that incredibly spectacular spinning back kick knockout on the Ultimate Fighter in one of the earlier seasons. And everybody was like, oh my God, this guy is going to just tear up the whole division. He's so good. He's fast. He's explosive. He's got excellent technique and so on. When you look at his career and many of his fights, it was always psychological problems, in the sense that he had a hard time just to get going. Like in many cases, he would lose rounds by being inactive, knowing full well he needs to go after the other guy. He needs to react and counter and do something, and he doesn't. And then all of a sudden, he seemingly wakes up and he starts going after the guy, and then he does great. And this happened throughout his entire career. And there's a really good video of somewhere, and I think that was also on the Ultimate Fighter, where he's talking about fear with Chael Sonnen, who was, I think, the coach at that time. And it was clear from that video that Uriah was struggling with that the fear, quote unquote, adrenal stress, doesn't matter how you want to label it, that was an issue. And I think, as far as I can tell, obviously, because we're on the outside here, as far as I can tell, that was clearly an issue with him throughout his entire career. Despite that, he managed to stay a professional MMA fighter for a long time. But I think he had a potential to get much, much further. And that is a lesson that is difficult to learn if you don't know that it's coming for you. So I've talked about this on my blog many times before, and on the podcast, is that what I think is a really good way of framing things when it comes to combat sports is, and this comes from Charles Staley, not from me, is have this training hierarchy, with the bottom part is what supports everything, where you spend a lot of time training, and that's physical traits, speed, strength, endurance, and so on. You need to have that solid foundation, because otherwise anything else that is on top of that is going to crumble once you get tired, once you're not fast enough anymore. On top of that physical traits foundation is technique, and that means you don't waste all those physical tools that you spend so much time developing. If you have sloppy technique, it's going to cost you a lot more energy than if you have good technique to throw the same punch or kick. So that is an important element to add to it. And then the layer on top of that, the next level, is strategy and tactics, which means, well, why do I do a certain technique, and when do I do it, and so on. It's not just, are you fast enough and strong enough to throw a correct left hook that has a lot of power and that lands. It's also, do you recognize when exactly is the best moment to throw it, as opposed to, I'm just going to throw a left hook because I'm good at throwing left hooks. Well, yeah, but the guy is out of range, so there's no way you can land it. Yeah, I'm going to try it anyway. That's the difference between good tactics and strategy and bad ones. But the final level, the top piece of the pyramid, is the psychological part. And that is often where it goes wrong. That's where you see guys who have maybe not the strongest, foundations underneath, or that they don't have the perfect technique, but they're incredibly durable mentally and psychologically speaking. They can take that beating and keep going. They can take the getting hurt and get back up again and go after the guy and so on. And I think it's in that part, that area, that there's still in the martial arts and combat sports area a lot of work that can be done on improving that. I wrote a bunch of articles on my blog about conquering your fear of fighting and how to spar and this and that, so you overcome that, because it was something that I, as a competitor, also struggled with. Um, Remember, this is a long time ago. There wasn't that much known about adrenal stress and its effects and so on. It's not that there was no research, it's just that it wasn't publicly known as much as it is now. So I would think that when I had to compete and I felt, the butterflies in my stomach and feeling weak and stressed out and this and that was like, oh, I'm just scared. It was only later on, much later on, after I finished competing, that I learned that, well, everybody feels that except a very small percentage of people, but they have other issues. Everybody feels that, and it's entirely normal. It's just something that you have to learn to deal with. And that's why when I coach people, when I train them, we specifically work on that from the get-go. And everything I do is as a coach, as an MMA coach, is geared towards that. Is geared towards integrating all these elements of that training hierarchy, of that pyramid, so they all work together from the get-go. We don't start with the physical training and then wait until all the other levels are done to start with the psychological aspects. We do that right away from the beginning. Well, I do. And everybody else needs to do what they want, but that's the way I approach it. Simply because that example of that one guy just shadow boxing like a bat out of hell. I mean, it was just so, to this day, it was one of the most impressive guys I've ever seen. And then seeing how it all falls apart once he has to do it for real, that was such an eye-opening experience, and something that to this day I still remember and try to incorporate in my training. Well, that's it. Okay, hope you guys found this one useful. Talk to you next time. Oh yeah, and if you can, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff, that always helps.